Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies overall focus in on the people, process, and technology around life sciences and help them scale their companies. One of the things that I have currently going on, you'll see a link at the very bottom of this, which is www.thescalingmethod.com/thoughts at scale. Link would take you to my weekly series where we focus in on scaling organizations, or how to properly grow organizations for scalability. So with that, in this episode, I wanted to introduce my guest, Susan Stipa. She has 20 years in the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, financial services, and healthcare related businesses. And so with that, I wanted to welcome her as a guest, and she's with CGLife, and they send me actually a lot of great guests that I've had. So thank you for everything that CGLife has done. It's been great to have somebody recruiting guests for me. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And I think I mentioned as we were talking in a couple minutes before the show started that yesterday I met one of your guests at the ISPE show, and he had great things to say. People stopped him in the aisles of the trade show, booth area, and said, "Hey, I saw you on that podcast." So I felt like I was going to be in great company today. So
I
glad
feel
to be
like
here.
it really shines a nice light on people other than me, which is, if anybody sort of knows based on listening to any of these episodes, I'm much more of an introvert and would rather not do this. I love being connected. I love telling stories. I love making sure that people get their story out. But yeah, it's great to have, people be highlighted by the show as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think my any of my staff that is listening right now, I say that all the time. I'm a learned extrovert. I'm an engineer by background, so we have to learn to use that other side of the brain, and that's a clear passion of mine, is kind of combining that left and right brain. But I'm right there with you in the introvert box.
Yeah. There we go. I wanted to move you over a little bit too. It seemed like I was cutting off a little bit of the top of your head. So for anybody that's
No,
watching
thank
us live on video, now you're a little more centered in the window as well. So
Excellent.
would you mind telling the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I always start out those intros by saying I'm a chemical engineer by background, a process engineer. For those of you who slice and dice the engineering world, those are the people that design the processes. I was started at Roche when I was 21 years old, taking FDA through the largest vitamin C plant in the world at that time. And when I think back, it's crazy that they would have put that kind of responsibility on a 21-year-old. But it was great experience. I, was in the middle of nowhere in Western New Jersey, and kind of thought, I think I'd like to do something else, and just left Roche after about 6 years, and just found myself a marketing job that was science oriented with a rheological instrumentation company. And that was literally the leap into thinking, I love to write. I'm a creative person. Let's make this leap. And so from there on out, I was either connected to science, connected to pharma, but always had kind of a marketing role. And I ended up back in engineering squarely with Foster Wheeler BioK. And that was the role that took me to the manufacturing sites of Regeneron, Biogen, J&J, Novartis, because we were out, building these gigantic, at the time, stainless steel oriented facilities. And there I started hiring PR and marketing agencies, and really kind of hit me that they did not understand our business. And more so, they didn't understand the engineers and scientists that I needed to work with them to get, stories placed and marketing done. And there was this big disconnect. Um, so I decided to start an agency in Philadelphia that kind of focused just on life sciences. I did that, and come to find out, CG Life in Chicago and San Diego at the time, they've been doing it for 20 years. So the idea was not original, but we combined forces. As COVID was beginning, we combined forces in March of 2020. So, and I have been there ever since. It is an incredible place that is made up of scientists like me who have this creative side. And we've got tons of PhDs and engineers and others that have just decided their job is, like you, to kind of communicate science.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to do either, because I feel like the self-diagnosed problem typically is spotlighted much more by people on the outside. I feel like for a lot of the organizations that I deal with, a lot of the people in either investors or somebody along the way will say, "Hey, look, this is too complex. I don't understand." And then typically it leads back to this, broader story. And yeah, I mean, I love the idea of having so many people that understand this world, a lot better than even I do, out there, looking to communicate it better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much of it is just getting people to take that step back, right? You do it as, part of this podcast. Just take a step back, ask the questions, and we do a lot of that. But when you ask a question and you've got the background, the ability to kind of synthesize what's coming at you rapidly, I think is just a little bit easier. Enough so then it's become something we all love to do.
Yeah, and I'm the interesting part for me though too is that you made this switch from bioprocess to having a firm of your own. Um, what was it like, more or less, in the early days for you creating this, and then sort of, you know where you start to interact then with CGLife? I would imagine that the firm had grown, substantially enough, right? So can you tell me a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit
we
more?
started we started at 0 and it was absolutely terrifying. There's no question. I am a mother of 4 kids. It was a time when, I really needed to, make, decent money, and so I kind of developed a way of talking to clients that would persuade them that we wanted to be, financially on a yearly retainer. And that was revolutionary because for me, it was pure survival, but there was a lot of reasoning behind that. A lot of the work that an agency does is upfront. We dedicate a tremendous amount of time early on in understanding what they're all about and understanding the science. So, leveling that out over a year, that financial model was really fantastic. And we've brought that to CG Life as well, particularly in the public relations area. But that ability to just sit down and listen, I had had so many contacts, that the Philadelphia area is rich with, all kinds of companies related to this industry. So I always said we were not an agency. CG Life is not, has not traditionally been an agency that launched drugs, right? Those There are tons and tons of companies that do that. Now, CG Life, we are now seriously considering this move into different parts of biopharma. But as well as I do, in the early days of my company, and even in the early days of CG Life, we started with adjacent diagnostics, things that would supply everything on the floor of a pharmaceutical biotech manufacturing facility, for example, instrumentation, all of those types of things, services, commissioning, validation, those kinds of companies. So it was a lot of fun. I was comfortable. It felt actually much more comfortable than when I was, in a hard hat as a process engineer. That was probably a little more alien to me.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been in more bioprocess facilities internationally than I have in the U.S.
Hmm.
As well. I mean, the my sort of intro to life sciences was whenever General Electric bought Amersham Pharmacia, and so that sort of brought me straight into 1 meter columns and stainless steel pretty directly, along with benchtop chromatography as well. And so it's a completely different world, going from medical devices and hospital instruments all the way through to now all of a sudden, the science that essentially results in the drugs that people take. So it was a big transition for me, mentally and physically. And yeah, just I can understand the transition then for you to go from bioprocess, also this way to communication, in the PR side, just must have been, pretty dramatic as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess unless you go back to, our childhoods. What did we like when we were young? What did we like in school? And I always loved writing. I always liked people, despite the introvert, labels we were throwing around. The idea of telling stories and explaining things and slowing down so that you can have these conversations. I now see that there was a lot of connectivity, from what I enjoyed, what brought me joy as a younger person. And so I think it was actually kind of much easier to go this way, at least for me. In the beginning, PR is a lot of writing, marketing is a lot of writing. It's a lot of thinking through and brainstorming. I have this theory that scientists are really, really good at this. They apply methodology to the practice of brainstorming solutions. It's what they do. And so I think that despite the commonly held belief that engineers and scientists are not that creative, my experience has been that they are remarkably creative in being able to come up with alternatives. And isn't that what marketing is? You think about the big campaigns that we see, they didn't just start with one idea. There's a hypothesis. Who's our audience? Who are we talking to? Engineers, scientists kind of do the same thing. What's the problem? What are the potential solutions? It's almost identical in process with how you kind of get to that final fabulous idea. There's just a lot more rigor and data. Although these days, CGLife is bringing an awful lot of data to that process as well because we're able to find it. Who are your competitors? Who are they talking to? How many of them are really legit competitors? That kind of data is starting to be a lot more accessible for us. And so the process between scientists and creative marketer, I think are kind of converging. That's my unique theory, and I'll probably be developing a little more data to support that. But it's something I've always believed.
So in preparation for our interview here, I read an article though that I believe you wrote, right?
Mhm.
That more or less talks about some of the same basis where you're just saying, hey, look, there is an approach to this. There is a method to this. It's not random. And much like science and the way that we approach science, there's an exact way that people should be thinking about crafting their story as well.
Yes. Yes. And I say to prospects who come and talk to us for the first time, it's one of my most enjoyable moments is when someone kind of comes to us to see if they know PR, for example, if they know marketing and they're a, chief marketing officer, they pretty much have their perception of what this is all about. Um, and maybe there is a little room to talk about how we're different. I gently kind of get into that conversation by talking about our process. So, the scientist, the engineer in me knows that people feel more comfortable when they can kind of see the runway, they can see what's coming. And so we do really put a lot of methodology and kind of an organized method to how we go about engaging with someone who comes to us with, hey, I'm just not getting enough coverage, or I need a new website, or we take 10 steps back. And we were talking about this before we got on, to just what's the real problem here.
Hmm.
You come to us perhaps with a marketing problem, but the problem may be, hey, you know we're we're not seeing enough leads. We're not, we actually have a product we want to launch. We launched a product and it's not going anywhere. We have a workforce problem. I mean, we're increasingly seeing these adjacent problems that, particularly in biopharma, we need a lot more scientists than we have. So, they come to us with a perceived problem. We kind of dig in, take a step back, get in a room. It's a friendly group that I am so lucky to work with. And I think we make people feel comfortable enough to just tell us what's really going on here.
Yeah.
And because we have scientists sitting in the room and generally are talking to scientists, all of a sudden the synergy starts to happen. And that's where we really start to get to the, you know, as you're in consulting, if you can really get people to relax and talk about what's really bothering them, in personal life or in the conference room, it's all the same. So that's what we strive to do. And then we have a lot of really smart people that can apply that, you know, talk about it as a scientist hypothesis first, and then let's talk about all the alternative solutions. But in marketing, it's even more fun because we get to apply creative ideas to that. And you know, the writing piece of this comes in. We help a lot of clients with their messaging, with their brand strategy, with their, don't just come to us and tell us you need a website. Let's take a couple steps back. So that's a lot of science.
Also important. So, do you feel like your engineering background really gives you a unique edge whenever you approach a client?
Can I tell you a secret? I would say that any engineer who's been out of engineering for the last 10 years couldn't engineer their way out of any of today's boxes. So let's just be clear, right? That would be that would be pushing it. I have not been in engineering for 10 years, but I do think, Don, that the idea that you can speak the language and that you understand is more than all of that put together. So um, I do I do think it gives us a huge edge. And
Yeah, I
we've
think
got, like I said, we've got microbiologists, we've got bioinformaticians, we've got just an enormous number of biologists. All of them were practicing and are probably even closer to having just come out of the labs or manufacturing floors than I, but we still all speak the language of biopharma, which is great.
yeah, I would think that the perspective, regardless of really understanding, hey, look, can you, if we threw you back in the manufacturing world, would you be able to go run a stainless steel column, or clean it, or, do anything else that, you have to run it through IQ, OQ, PQ. Yeah, I don't know that anybody would want to, go and do that after not having done it for a while. But at the same time, I would imagine that it gives you a perspective where when you approach the conversation, you at least kind of understand where they are and where they need to get to.
Yeah, and you have an endless fascination. Like I just was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday at this international, the ISPE show, and I said, Liz, listen, any scientist has learned a very narrow piece of something. If they're a biology major in college and they get into something, and that was why I left. I was originally a chemistry major, but the idea of being kind of boxed in was not something I thought I would enjoy. And it's comforting because I think if you're a non-scientist, you believe that all scientists know everything. And that's crazy, right? There are narrow slices that we all develop an expertise in. So I still have an absolute fascination with manufacturing and, the whole idea that we've come from, mammalian bioreactors that I used to design into this world where since COVID, we've got, you know, so many more platforms,
Mm,
mRNA, other plant-based platforms that are now being positively looked at by FDA. That makes me just happy because I that's my area of, specialty.
yeah.
So I'm always going to have a keener interest or alliance with clients who are CMOs and CDMOs and the manufacturing side. But I've got a colleague who's in rare disease. I've got a colleague who. So it's just we all have our specialties, but overall, CG Life is a pretty amazing place to be able to bring together all these different disciplines and then be able to even make the leap into things that we may not have worked in, but we're super interested in.
Absolutely. What are some of the most significant changes that you've seen in the life sciences industry, throughout your time? Where would you sort of put the markers down and say these are the most significant things that I've seen in my career?
That's a cool question. I think the biggest one is one I just alluded to. I think there was such a narrow focus on, well, I started when, it was pharma. So those are, chemistry based drugs. Moving into the biotech industry is, I believe I, lived through that. So that's decades now of being in and around biotech. So assuming that's probably the biggest change we will see in a long time and now moving into cell and gene therapy, the other piece of it is the size and scale of what it takes to make these drugs, right?
Hmm.
So that is a gigantic shift in everything. And we're approaching the point where we're curing disease. So I think the next big thing that I'm really interested in seeing how this plays out is how is that going to get paid for, right? How can, the economics of the biotech industry right now are, have been pretty spectacular up until the last year or so, right? I mean, we've got, 5,000 biotech firms, 86% of them are still private. They're many of them less than 50. I think I read a statistic, 70% of them still have less than 50 employees. And what a vibrant, amazing thing to have seen happen out of this big pharma, that I started in at Roche, and you were at Roche too. So, these are big behemoth companies to this vibrant, you know, almost a competitive um, atmosphere with biotechs competing for money. And, that's a place we love to play in because, we've got thousands of investors, thousands of companies. Who's going to really rise to the top? It's those that have really clear messaging around their science, right?
Right.
So I think that's the biggest change, from the manufacturing floor heading into these much smaller clean rooms that, we have a lot of clients approaching that challenge in so many different ways. And I mean, I get to sit there and see all of this come through our doors, all of these different ways of approaching the smaller and smaller and smaller batches. I mean, I worked with, stainless steel bioreactors at 10,000 gallons in California at Genentech. These are huge. And now we're talking, plant-based platforms, mRNA in clean rooms the size of my living room. It's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think about I mean, I was saying this to somebody the other day that, and, as I conduct more and more interviews with companies that are either working on NK therapies or CAR T therapies, I feel like you can almost trip over all of them. But it's at the same time, it's because of the fact that we have these smaller scale, the capability to run small batches now that, wasn't nearly as prevalent, just a few years ago. And so it's out there. But to your point about the economics, it will be interesting to see what happens, throughout time, because some of these things are some of the most expensive things that I've seen, come out of the pharmaceutical industry as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and yeah, 70% of the, drug development pipeline is coming out of biotech still to this day versus, big pharma. And yet, when you get to a certain point and you've actually got a major drug to launch, big pharma is still is vibrant and ready to go. What's going to happen when, we continue to see these $80,000, you know, but cure? I think the economics are just going to have to play out. And of course, in a country like this versus a national health system, there's a lot of things I'm really interested, a little concerned, but really interested to see that how they play out because the innovation and the novel therapeutics that are coming down the pike. I mean, we're just seeing the start of that. So, our kids, it's going to be an incredible world, and that's what's fun about doing what we do, right?
Absolutely. So in terms of the complete landscape that CGLife deals with, I just kind of look at the overall life sciences ecosystem and everything that you have to do. Um, are there challenges that you commonly encounter, and then how do you address those challenges? As you look at the landscape, it's a pretty challenging one. Oftentimes to try and break down the story and work through, how to approach the client's, main needs.
Yeah, yeah, and that could be particularly challenging. When I joined CG Life, we didn't do as much in the very early stage, phase one and phase two. We now are really very interested in that and have a lot of clients in that early stage when, we all know what the statistics are, right? 10% of any, 10% of these drugs are making it. It's a very ambiguous landscape to play in the first place. So, but our job, no matter what, is to help slice and dice and find an area that isn't being talked about that aligns with what our clients are doing. We call it white space, right? So we're sitting down, we're looking at their competitors, and many of them we're defining even what the competition is doing. Now many of our clients have done some of that work, but the depth of messaging that we can get into looking at competitors. We have a really strong brand strategy group that is usually the first step, and then moving into once we found that unique space that they can live in, and that we feel that you know is unassailable from a competitive standpoint, that's when we move ahead. And then the tactics are multiple, but our greatest challenge is probably just being okay with the ups and downs of those early stage companies. So we counter that and balance that with very large clients that we also assist on many fronts. But our feeling was that we wanted to really embrace the full drug development pipeline, and that we could help in the early stages, and that would just have to be modeled a little bit differently. So the ups and downs that our clients are going through is mirrored in our own ups and downs, but we have a very flexible kind of approach to that, and we know that they'll be back. I mean, so many of our clients come back after moving to another biotech, another cell and gene therapy company, moving into going from and bouncing from big pharma into diagnostics and back. We helped brand Illumina in the first place. We've been in cell and gene therapy, so that's challenging, and just watching and helping, we think, helping unfold what is this all about. Journalists don't always have the time to dig into what is becoming a very nuanced industry in cell and gene, and finding that white space is increasingly fun for us, but sometimes challenging for the investors that we're trying to talk to, who they really don't have the time to try and slice and dice, and our clients need to be able to tell that story to investors and catch their attention in the first place. So it's I guess that's the biggest challenge, but it's also the most fun for us.
Yeah. And then overall, what role do you see communications playing inside of, life sciences as a whole? When you look across the landscape, again, this idea of telling a story, I know is important, but also if you sort of break that apart and you say, for biotechnology and pharmaceuticals, where do you really see it, playing a significant role?
So we break communications into a lot of places, but I think that the the idea that we're not talking about investor relations. So we currently, investor relations isn't something we are talking here about science communications. I think the biggest place that we can play is in communicating that to the media. Now, I probably have a bias since I also came in and ran the PR department for the last 3 years. I'm currently working in the biopharma area, but for 3 years, it was breaking down the barriers that the media had with dealing with a PR agency, and the perception. We talked about this earlier, that, oh gosh, I mean, I used to hire PR agencies that would literally throw invoices over the brick wall and really didn't have a lot of idea about what was going on. We've broken a lot of those barriers down. Our goal is to get this industry clearly speaking to journalists, and we're the middleman. We just facilitate that relationship, so that journalists can hear from the SMEs and the KOLs exactly what this is all about. But surprisingly, that doesn't happen naturally. I
Mm,
mean, companies can do this.
sure.
I mean, for sure, PR, there are heads of PR at the largest pharma, that still, I think there's a disconnect between just treating the press as people who need information, good, scientific, solid information, and our ability to bridge that gap. And that then goes along all of the other places that we play in communications in biopharma. From providing data. Everybody's talking about AI. Well, instead of just preaching, we've, put together a weekly newsletter that just kind of explains what's going on. We're not getting anything out of that. It's just giving people who need information, good information, whether it's from one of our clients or for one of our clients or not. CG Life plays in the science area of communications, and we're always asking ourselves, how can we help people in this industry communicate better? Again, whether it is, to our benefit of grabbing another client or not. Journalists need sources. So that's one example, right? We'll bring clients to the table, but we've done it for you. We'll make some calls and get you somebody, if somebody cancels. I think that's how I'm here today. So,
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I really do. I wanted to take this moment anyway. I wanted to make sure before we concluded that I also, sort of mentioned, just the wonderful, um, partnership that I've felt from CGLife. Right. So, I remember
uh-huh.
randomly, all of a sudden I get this email from Maggie Whitney that says, hey, Don, I have somebody that I think would be a good guest for your podcast. Would you be interested? Right. And so as a podcaster, I'll tell everybody where I started out was I would sort of stalk people between a couple of different areas. So I would go to publications because publications, oftentimes if people are in publications, they're able to talk more about things. I've been in large companies myself, as have you. And oftentimes you're instructed, look, you don't go talk to the press because, we certainly don't want you to say something that's going to impact our company on a broad scale. But then I kept thinking to myself, there have to be people out there that want to get the word out. And as I sort of turned that corner on, I think 100 episodes or so, more and more PR firms started reaching out and saying, "Hey, we have somebody that we think would be a good guest." And I really, and I said this to you guys as well, via email and to you directly as well, Susan, that I feel just so honored to get to work with people from CGLife and have benefited greatly. So I appreciate that aspect of it because you brought me some wonderful guests that I wouldn't have found on my own. Frankly, I probably
Aw.
would have. It probably would have been quite a while before I would have gotten back around to them. And who knows whether or not if they would have found me, to your point about, hey, look, they could reach out themselves. But at the same time, it's kind of a daunting task to do yourself as well. So I do appreciate the partnership, with CGLife. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is all. We have a great team. There's be 75 people that are smiling right now to hear that. But we're our own ecosystem, right? You've got
Right.
the biopharma ecosystem, but this communications, if we all believe that we can help each other to get this incredible science out to the people that need it, then it's easy. So anytime we would love to help moving forward, and it has been delightful on our side too. When Maggie told me about this, and she said, "Oh, you're gonna love Don. He's great." So,
Thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to turn it back to you one more time. So, what is the best leadership advice that you've ever received?
let's see. I think that my dad, who was in pharma and was an engineer, by the way, once told me, if you can just work really hard in the first 6 weeks, blow somebody away, like first
Mhm.
impressions, really. You'll have them as a client, you'll have them as a friend for life. So put all your effort in early on. I don't know that that's necessarily leadership advice as much as kind of life advice or even, how to keep a client advice. On the leadership side, I think I'm going to be a little provocative here because I think that I had to really develop my own style. I grew up in a time when as a young mom, you couldn't really even talk about being pregnant with your first child. You had to hide
Mm.
things. I mean, this is, definitely touching on how long I've been in this industry. Um, the idea that now life and work are much more easily, even post COVID, because we're actually working from home. So the idea that it's okay to be a leader who is human, I think is something I kind of had to come to myself. And then I found CG Life, where these guys have been doing this for, like I said, we just celebrated our 20-year anniversary. They have much that same point of view. But I will tell you, Don, it's still remarkably rare to find companies where the people, really, the human part of allowing people to see you when you've had no sleep, or, your dog got sick, you know, or you're just sitting down and having real conversations and not this rigidity of corporate mentality that we've both seen
Hmm.
that I
Yeah.
think prevented a lot of, of the creativity, the brainstorming, the things that make work fun. So yeah, I don't know that I got that advice. I kind of had to learn it by, maybe the hard way.
But it's a great lesson for people to take away as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because it's it's funny to me because people talk about, one, they talk about emotional intelligence, and then they talk about empathy. And then the very next thing that they sort of talk about is, well, we need everybody back in the office because of some corporate rule. And I'm like, well, I think the two could, kind of conflict with each other, um, depending on the situation. So you might want to, I don't know, just sort of think through how do you communicate that aspect of it as well. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's important for people to walk away with. And especially, we have a lot of people who are developing companies that, as they're developing their company, they're sort of saying, hey, look, I would like to keep these core values tight and make sure that we carry them forward. And I would imagine that a lot of the things that you just said, also will come through, as well, that, yeah, we need to make sure that we don't lose that as we get bigger.
Oh
So,
yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me say it. It's a passion of mine, so appreciate it. This has been so much fun. I really enjoyed the conversation.
sure. There are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
I think it goes back to this biotech industry, the fearlessness of an industry that is just keeps going. That's on the business side. I think the young family, moms and dads that I see now working in an environment that actually allows them to be with their families and work, and give us their best because they're not driving like we all did an hour and a half into Philadelphia in my case and back. The things have changed. That work life balance really is inspirational to me because I've been able to see it happen in my lifetime. But then also this biotech industry and its pure fearlessness, this ability to just keep going and coming up with new ideas and going out in a very difficult um, ecosystem to find money. And I love that stuff.
Yeah. What concerns you?
Uh, I think drug access is a big passion of mine. I am, and I think all of us realized during COVID that there are a lot of places in the world that um, drugs just that we take for granted are just not available. ISP, we had the commissioner of the FDA speak yesterday. So, yeah, Tuesday morning, Robert Califf, and he also talked about it from the perspective of drug shortages. I'm more about concerned about drug access, and I think there's a lot of hope. I think with this opening up of other platforms that can quickly allow countries that are underserved and have less available budgets to be able to get these therapeutic platforms up and running fast. That's a passion. But it is concerning because there are things happening in the world as we all know today. So I work on that. I have another company that I'm part of, pharmaceuticals, that deals in plant-based platforms. So it's definitely something that I don't just talk about, but I'm extremely interested in just making it easier for underserved areas to get the drugs they need.
Thank you for sharing that. And last question, what excites you?
I think it's kind of the same thing that I talked about before. This idea that every single day we get to see what the future holds in healthcare.
Yeah.
And I mean, what kind of job, you know, is that you are able every day to kind of get glimpses of things that you thought you knew a lot about the industry that you're in, and then somebody comes up with an idea and you just are blown away. So almost every day in this biopharma world we live in, I still am blown away by the brilliance and the courage and the fearlessness of the scientists that come up with the next thing, and then are explaining it to the world or asking us to help them explain it to the world. It's an amazing job that we have here. I include
Well,
you in it too because I know you get to see the same thing.
thank you for sharing that, and I concur. Is that it is an amazing thing to see also how people piece things together. I'm always amazed at how scientists approach well, we just have to put these two things together, and this is how we do it, and it just, they describe it as if, you're turning on a light switch or something. And we know that their job is a lot tougher than that, and especially in this given environment. And so I appreciate the brilliance that I get to work around as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
same thing.
amazing. And in a regulatory, we make eggs for, breakfast, and we don't have to go through a regulatory 10-year landscape. It takes a lot of guts.
Yes, it does. Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming on the Life Science Success podcast. I greatly appreciate being here. And I really appreciate all the work that CGLife does in our industry. And thanks a lot for coming and sharing it.
No, it was absolutely my pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.